Okay, so now we move to the next part of the lecture. And here we would like to introduce Cristina Stanculescu from University Libre, Brussels. And we will be talking about, will be a lecture about the European Union in times of crisis. So,
thank you very much for the introduction. Indeed, today I'm going to speak to you about the European Union in times of crisis, because as you know, the crisis has started already in 2007 from pandemic, and it seems like a never-ending crisis because we all the time hear the story. We open the newspaper and in the frontline we hear this story. Very much the crisis is connected with the structure in itself of the European Union. As it has been mentioned, my name is Cristina Stanculescu and I'm coming from the research center which is called Central, and I'm teaching for already a few years at Libre. Just to a little bit about how I will see this presentation, you can interrupt me at any moment when I speak, because I don't know exactly which is your level of knowledge about the European Union, so it would be important for me to know if you didn't understand something. Maybe appreciated that you know something about competence of the European Commission when I'm going to speak about this institution, and actually you don't know. So don't hesitate to interrupt me and to ask me questions, because this is the aim of the summer school. It's not just to have lectures, it's also to interact with the professors that are coming in a more informal way. Of course, I'm going to have a presentation that will last for 45 minutes, 1 hour. You will see much of the things that I'm going to say about the presentation is going to happen. But afterwards, we will have some time for discussion. I know that I have the tendency of speaking a little bit fast. Just that I speak. So if I go too fast, don't hesitate again to tell me this, because I am very, very aware of that. Even if English or French are not my primary or other tongues, I do the same again in all the languages. I want to talk about the crisis, and especially want to talk about the crisis in the European Union. First of all, what you need to know is that the European Union has an intimate relation with the notion of crisis, which has very often been seen as an opportunity for the integration process. If we think about the way the European Union was born, it was born at the end of the Second World War, when it was the end of a crisis. The end of a big crisis, which was the war and the conflict that opposed the states of Europe. So from that moment, the notion of crisis and the notion of European Union are very much related. Nevertheless, it started on a crisis. The crisis has never left the European Union construction. And today, when we think about current crisis, we remember that Herman Van Rompuy, who is the president of the European Council, declared in 2010 that if one state drops out of the Eurozone, then it will be the end of the Eurozone, and then it will be the end of the European Union. So, very often, when we talk about a crisis and the EU, we talk about the possibility of ending the EU because of the crisis. So even if on the one hand we can see it as an opportunity for further integration, on the other side it has very often been seen as a big danger for the extinction of the European construction in itself. And this is something very important, because the two logics keep going together since the very beginning. And because we are talking about the very beginnings of the European Union, because I wanted to show you a little bit using historical examples, the connection between crisis and the European Union, let's go back and look at what Jean Monnet was saying in his memoir back in 1976, looking at the first 20 years of European construction. He affirmed that Europe will be forced in crisis, and the construction will actually be the sum of the solution that will be adopted to that crisis. Let's take one very clear example, the European Defense Community, which was actually born, the idea of having the European Defense Community was born at the beginning of the century. As you know, the European construction started in the 50s by putting together two industrial sectors which are essential to the functioning of the economy, the coal and the steel industry. And this is how, step by step, starting with this, the European construction started to be made. Almost simultaneously, in already 52, there was a talk to construct something more than just economic community, and to make something of more political. And this is how the European leaders, based on the proposition of France, discussed about putting together military and foreign affairs, military capacities and foreign affairs, and constructing a defense community, which later, on the basis of a proposition of an Italian minister of that time, was to be called the European Political Community. The idea, which appeared in 52, developed, a project has been written, and in 54 it was to be passed in the French Assembly, the French Parliament. Well, when that came to happen, actually the context has changed very much from the 50s. Because if in the 50s there was a large enthusiasm about the European construction and about the Jean Monnet method of integration and about the idea of putting together all the European countries and not just uniting the economy but also uniting peoples and individuals, already at the middle of the year of the 50s, the idea was starting to be seen in a quite critical way, because it appeared that it was too soon to put together military capacities after just a few years after the end of the Second World War. So this is why the balance changed, and because the balance changed in the French politics, the proposition that started from the French was rejected. At a time when that's what's happening, Raymond Aron, which you probably all heard about, was writing a book about the European defense community. And in that book, he wrote that actually this would be the end of the European construction. He said it was a very nice dream, but look, what happened with this is the end of the first step that we're going to be made. He wrote that book and he sent it to his publishers. In the moment that that book was going out on the market, actually his idea was already old, because meanwhile, there has been a conference, the Messina Conference, which actually set the basis for the Treaty of Rome, which are today one of the big steps of the European integration. Why? Because it's with the Treaty of Rome and with the Conference of Messina, which means the relaunch of the European construction, that the economic side has been developed in the European Union, and as you probably remember, also the nuclear energy has been introduced into the treaties, and the basis of the European communities, they were called at the time, were put. So just in a few years, the balance has changed. So crisis is at the very basic of the European Union. When one crisis seems to be there, and we already announced the end of the European Union, we managed to go on in another sector, in another way, and to pursue integration. Another example that I'm going to take is the General de Gaulle crisis of the empty chair, which happened in the 60s. Actually, General de Gaulle, which came in the French politics at the end of the 50s as a president, had a very nationalistic and sovereign-friendly vision of the European Union. He imagined the European Union as being more a confederal model and not going towards the supranational, more federalist vision that was dominating at the beginning, or at least struggling to be there at the beginnings of the European construction. So he vetoed a certain number of decisions into the meetings that were taking place at the time. First of all, he opposed the entry of Great Britain, who wanted to enter these European communities that were just trying to be established. And General de Gaulle opposed to it. He also tried to forge a European agricultural common policy that would be in accordance to what France considers to be its own interest. And that is also something very important, because he managed to pass a more national interest view on the way the European politics should be happening. And not the latest, during the 60s, he, as the European Commission was asking for more independence in its own decision-making, she asked for her to have, and for the European communities generally, to have access to their own resource of financing. Because before that, what was actually happening is that each state that was a member of the European communities was actually contributing with a certain amount of money to the budget of the European communities. Or what the European Commission wanted is to have its own reserves based on the exchanges that were taking place between the European states, and of course based also on the agricultural projects, knowing that the agricultural policy was at the time constructed. And General Stanculescu was very much against this. Why? Because if this would have given too many powers to the European Commission, which would mean a very supranational vision on the way the European politics should happen. This is why he opposed this measure, and this is why for 7 months there was what has been called the empty chair crisis, related also to other things. At the end of this 7 months crisis, General de Gaulle was, let's say, there was a compromise called the Compromise of Luxembourg, which underlined the fact that a member state can, in case of its national interest, is in danger because of one of the decisions that are taken at the European level, can oppose and say, this is my national interest, I do not want this kind of decision to be made. So, again, another crisis. But if we look at a few years later, what we see is that Great Britain entered the European Union. In the end, the European Commission managed to have its own reserves. This is at the beginning of the 70s, and afterwards, because of that, it was considered that more democracy should be brought into the European decision making, because if you give directly money to political institutions, then you should be represented. And based on that decision, in the 70s, it had been decided that the European Parliament will be elected directly. So, even if, again, we had a crisis, there was the relaunch and the reverse, which came afterwards. Third example that I wanted to take is something that has been called the Weber Plan, which is a plan that was made in the 70s, and it was a plan that it was written in order to create a monetary union for the European Union. Because of the international context of the beginning of the 70s that you all know about, this plan has never been adopted, and no big steps have been taken towards it. So, a big question has been put at the time about Europe's capacity to build a truly integrated economy and to move towards a more integrated economic union, as it has been said in the Treaty of Rome and even before that. Nevertheless, if we look at the 80s, an economic union was born at the beginning of the 80s, and after that in the Maastricht Treaty. So again, we see something which is not working and something which is functioning a few years later. Last example that I'm going to take, and this is something that still has many consequences nowadays, and maybe we can still see it, is the Danish no to the referendum for the Treaty of Maastricht. Because in 1992, after the Maastricht Treaty was agreed, there was a referendum in Denmark to see if the treaty will be incorporated into the Danish law, and of course, if it will be considered, if it will be validated. And even if nobody thought that there would be any kind of problem, the treaty didn't pass. And this was the first time when a big opposition into a state was expressed in a referendum towards the European integration. This has meant that ever since, also there were quite concerns about that before, but ever since concerns about the democratic deficit have never ceased to grow. Nevertheless, a few months later, Treaty of Maastricht passes because a new referenda is organized and the Danish will say yes a few months later. So what we can see from all this crisis is that despite all this moment, integration seems to flow around substantive controversies, and it seems to solve some of these controversies, and it seems to just go away with the others. Another important thing is the fact that the member states have responded to all these conflicts and crises either by creating exceptions or outcomes, either by just not doing something into a specific area. For instance, the Great Britain, the Eurozone has been created, but Great Britain is not inside, because didn't agree with the specification of the euro, which this country considered to be too restrictive. If we look again at another example, the Schengen one, Denmark has signed the Schengen agreement. It's in the Schengen, but every time that there is a new specification, a new law, a new regulation that is involved into the Schengen agreement, and that will be compulsory for the countries in the Schengen agreement, Denmark can choose not to apply it. So another opt-out that we can see, and this is the way in which part of the conflicts and of the crisis were created. What we see also is that despite of all this crisis, integration has constantly moved forward. And it has constantly moved forward being based on what we can see as three basic compromises on which this crisis we can feel today this crisis because of these compromises that we can feel in the very basic structure of the European Union. The first of these compromises that we can find, and that it has been very visible, as we will see later, in today's crisis, is the one between the supranational logic and the intergovernmental logic. On the one side, those who consider that the European Commission, the European Central Bank, the European Court of Justice should have more power and to have more capacity to decide to impose their decision to member states, and those who consider that the European integration process should be controlled by the member states. So this is one of the compromises, and the different decisions and the different crises that have happened have tried to manage this compromise, but never they managed to completely solve. Second big compromise, which was a result of this crisis, and that again we can see today when we look at what has happened since the beginning of the crisis, it's the tension between a more technocratic view over the European process and over the idea of giving power again to institutions as the European Commission, as the European Court of Justice, or as the European Central Bank. At the end of the 40s and the beginning of the 50s, being a technocrat was seen in a very positive manner. Why? Because it was after the war, and politics have brought war. So having a technocrat government, it would mean to make the right decisions and not the political decision, which will be dependent on the context. This is why we have a technocrat, a very strong component, technocrat component, at the very basis of the European Union. This technocrat component is opposed, of course, with a more democratic view on what the European Union should be. And this is why already in the 70s, we have already in the 50s actually the establishment of a European Assembly, and afterwards in the 70s its transformation in a true European Parliament, even if at the time it wasn't called like that, but a true European Assembly which was direct elected, and a constant reinforcement of its power in order for it to gain legitimacy. So we have this second compromise and this second tension that we can feel between European Union being a technocrat construction and European Union being a more democratic one. Third kind of compromise is the one between the federalist and the more confederalist visions of the European Union. Because one of the questions that haunts everybody's mind since the 50s is, what should the European Union be? What kind of construction do we want, and what kind of construction are we building? The federalists say that we should have a federal state. The confederalists say we should have something like a market at the European level, but the process should be mainly controlled by the member states. Or this compromise isn't solved, and each time European leaders sit at the table and they need to decide on a new European treaty or a new measure, different kind of ideas about where the European Union should go are being opposed. So this is something that we can feel today, and this is something, of course, that has been felt in the way the crisis was dealt with during the last year. Okay, let's go back and look at the current crisis, because we discussed about the different crises that the European Union has faced. Of course, there were many more than the ones that I mentioned. I just wanted to show you the logic that is behind that. If we look at the current one, actually we can say, if we look at the way the newspaper presented and the way that the whole external and the economic observers show, that the current crisis has actually three phases. The first one is the 2007-2008 phase, which is actually a global phase. And it comes from what happened in the United States, where the economic problems started to be seen. And at that time, the European Eurozone and the European economies more largely were seen as being robust enough to be able to repass any kind of crisis. So it was a period where, even if there were problems at the European level or at the global level, there weren't that much problems at the global level. That's not the case also in 2008 and 2009, which is the second period of the global crisis. Why? Because this was after the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers Bank, if you remember. And this has really started to put pressure on the European banks, and there were states in which European banks needed to be saved. So at that time, the European Central Bank started to play a very important role in trying to rescue the bank system. It was also for the national government of some of the member states, like Belgium or France, that needed to put together money to save one of the banks, that they had, in order to make sure that the banking system will manage to surpass the crisis. Even like that, the European economies were still being seen as robust enough to repass also this part of the crisis. But this is not anymore the case since 2010. What happened in the 2010 is that it's another period, a more European one of the crisis started. And it's called the period of sovereign debt crisis. What is that? If you remember, actually, at the end of 2009, there were elections in Greece. And the new socialist government in Greece decided to make an audit on the public finances as they found it when they came into power. And what they have discovered is that there were a lot of financial problems and a lot of budget problems in Greece. When this has come into the eyes of the press, this has put a lot of pressure on the Eurozone to solve the problem of the debt of the Greece at the beginning of 2010. At that time, the calendar had speed up very much, because one step that the European leaders were trying to make to find a solution, to find the money for Greece, one step the rotation agencies were making in downgrading Greece notes. You remember, of course, about that, and also in downgrading the prospects of recovery of the European economy generally, and especially the Greek one. So there has been a lot of pressure since 2010 on the European euro. And there were especially great difficulties in responding to this debt crisis starting 2010 for at least three reasons. First of all, because the European Union is an ongoing construction, as I already told you. And the fact that it's an ongoing construction, it means that it doesn't have all the mechanisms necessary to solve an economic crisis. Maybe nations, they won't have either, but at least they have more instruments on which they can rely on. They have the budget, they have the fiscal policy, they have, or they had before the currency, or the European Union has just a part of these elements. This is why, being an ongoing construction, it didn't have all the means it needed in order to cope with the economic crisis. Second of all, because, as Herman Van Rompuy put it, if markets have the luxury of moving to the speed of the foot of the mouse, political process cannot deliver so quickly. So the institutional architecture of the European Union, which requires, as we already see, a lot of compromises and a lot of sitting together, and the European Parliament and the Commission and the Council and the ministers requires a lot of time. So we cannot respond as fast as a national government could do it in a national state. We need to discuss and to debate and to make decisions and to find compromise. And this cannot be done in one night. Often they were trying to respond to the pressure of the market, but never that has been a radical decision that changed the balance. Second of all, and also that's something that plays, is the fact that in the European Union there is also, of course, a political process. Juncker, for instance, which was the president of the European Central Bank, declared the fact that if you have 70 governments, referring, of course, to the 17 members of the Eurozone, if you have 17 governments which sit around the table, you actually have more than 40 political parties. So more than 40 political views on what should be done. Because, of course, you have a political party, then you can say, okay, we have socialism of France, or socialism of Belgium, or Romania, or Poland, or whatever. And at the same time, you have also some kind of national legacy and preference, which make that it's not as easy as saying that we are all socialist or conservative, and then we have 3 or 4 or 5 main political tendencies. So there is an institutional architecture of the European Union, and also a kind of heaviness of the political process, which makes that it's very difficult to respond to the crisis in a very, very fast way, at least at the European level. But let's go back to what actually is a crisis. Now we have seen, what I've done until now is to look at the signs of the crisis, first of all, more largely in the role in the European construction, and second of all, to what we could call the current crisis, but as it has been seen from the newspaper. If we look at the origins of the term of crisis, we can see that it's, at its very origins, defined as a period of intense difficulty or danger where important decisions must be made. Actually, the term crisis is coming from the Latin term crisis, which is very close, of course, which was actually a term that was used when somebody was ill, when somebody was sick. And the crisis was the period where the death or the recovery was being decided. So crisis is a point at which we don't know exactly in which direction we are going to go, but we know for sure that something important has to happen, because if not, the current situation cannot be sustained the way it is. In political science, the terms of crisis are often seen as moments when institutions, and more largely agents, have more possibility of actions than in normal time. Of course, they have a certain number of constraints also, but generally, in times of crisis, what is searched for is more political innovation. It's other kind of solutions than the one that we had before, because the one that were there before took us to the moment where we can say that we have a crisis. So the main question that I will try to respond to in the following minutes will be, how was the crisis dealt with at the European level, and how has this affected the European Union? Because if we say that the crisis is a moment in which either we die, either we recover, well, what have we done? Have we died or have we recovered? Of course, it's very, very soon to respond to that kind of question, as we are not yet at the end of the crisis. Yet, what we can see is that some elements of response can be found in the different at the different levels that we are going to look at. How has the crisis been dealt with? If we look at the European integration theories, they already gave us some answer looking, because some researchers have already started to interpret the way the European Union has responded to the crisis. They already give us some insights. I choose 3 main integration theories, and I will tell you exactly what researchers are putting as elements of explanation for the way the European Union has responded. First of all, the neo-functionalism. As you all remember, neo-functionalism is the theory that was born very fast after the process of European integration, and which aim was to explain why do the European integration process happen? Why do states choose to give their sovereignty away and just to sit at the European table to make decisions, and afterward for that decisions to be imposed on them? And the neo-functionalists, the functionalists at front and the neo-functionalists afterwards, they were saying that actually one of the reasons for which this process is happening is the one of spillover. That is, that if we put together a certain area, because we realize that for us it will be important and it will be, we'll gain more economic advantages, for instance, if we would put together the coal and steel industry. Afterward, the fact that we put together already a sector will make us realize that we need to put together even more in order for that to be useful for the way the economy works. So for them, the fact that we already made a step into the direction of integrations will oblige us somehow to make all the time more steps and all the time to integrate more and more. This is why when now functionalists look at the current crisis, what do they say? They say, but it was very obvious. Actually, the current crisis is just something that was clearly there since the beginning of the 90s when we first started to think to put together our economies and that we built together the economic monetary union. Because it's not enough to put together the currency. We need to put together the fiscal policy, that is the taxes that we raise on people. We need to put together the budget, that means for the European Union to have larger possibilities of spending money, and also to coordinate our budgets, to spend money in the same way, in the same areas, and to have the same kind of economic policy. So they were saying the fact that we put together the monetary policy makes that we are obliged more and more to put all the other sectors together also. This is why the crisis is, in the end, an opportunity that would allow for this process to speed up, this process which already started, as I said, in the 90s. Second interpretation of the current crisis is the one of those that would be called intergovernmentalists. What do they say? They say, now functionalists, you are not right. Actually, it's not the fact that we've done something in the 90s that explains the fact, that explains our responses to the crisis. It's rather the fact that the member states control the integration process. And in this integration process, member states have some preferences. And their preferences are coming from different sources. For instance, the structure of their economy. Germany has 30% of its economy based on its industry. Greece has 10 or 15. It's not the same thing that they require from the European level. So what intergovernmentalists say, what is important in the way we deal with the crisis is who is sitting at the table, who is expressing their preferences, and whom we are going to listen. And what they assume is that there is a game of power, more or less, that is taking place at the European table, and actually that, for instance, German hegemony has been felt ever since the beginning of the crisis, because it's the biggest state, and especially because it's one of the states with the most robust economy from the Eurozone. So they say we should look at what the member states want. And this is how we will manage to know why certain decisions have been made. Third kind of theory which tries to explain the way in which the crisis has been dealt with is the new institutionalism. What do the neo-institutionalists say? They say, well, actually, nothing new can happen right now. If we look at all the things that have been decided since 2007, 2008, and especially since 2010, when the crisis has become really European, what we can see is that we are not actually making a big new decision. We are not making a new treaty. We are not making a new economic policy. We are just adding and strengthening things that were already there. We already had the Pact for Stability and Growth, which involves certain obligations for the member states. What the new institutionalists say, and especially the historian ones, they say, well, look, actually, we are just strengthening this Pact of Security and Growth. We are just adding more sanctions to it. And it's partially true. So they say nothing new is happening. We just have an incremental kind of move. Let's look at what exactly has happened. I'm going to look at different kind of levels, because we saw that, first of all, the crisis is at the origins of the European Union, and it has historically played a role into shaping the way the European Union exists and its decision making. either political one and institutional one, of course. That was the first part. Second part, we discussed about what's a crisis, what were the meanings of the current crisis, and afterward we discussed about the theories that political science is proposing in order to explain it. Now we are going to look at what has actually changed. I'm going to do it, as I already told you, at a few different levels. First of all, we are going to look at the policy in itself. And because the largest part of the European Union's activity related to the crisis was related to the economic and monetary union, we are going to look at what were the changes that happened since 2010, especially in that area. Second of all, I'm going to look at the different institutions. And we are going to see if their equilibrium has been modified by the crisis. Third of all, I'm going to look a little bit at the national level, at the relation between the member states and the European Union, and fourth of all, we are going to look at the way the Europeans see the European Union in this context of crisis. So all these different levels to see if, on whom we can trust in terms of explaining the way the impact of the crisis has been shown since in the last years. First of all, let's talk about a little bit about what was the policy of economic and monetary union before the crisis. Because in order to see if there were any kind of change, we need to know how it was before. Well, you need to know that the economic and monetary union has been actually set up by the Maastricht Treaty, as I told you. Of course, an economic integration of the European economies was demanded and was in the Treaty of Rome already. But this has taken a lot of time to be actually put in place. This is why a new treaty has been necessary. What is very important to know is that from the very beginning, this policy, the economic and monetary union construction, was an asymmetric construction. Because on the one hand, it centralized the currency, so the monetary policy, and the exchange rate policy into the hands of the central bank, essentially, and of other national banks, but it left to the control of the member states other important components of an economic policy. That is the fiscal elements, which the states need, so the power of raising taxes, the budgetary, so the decision on what, when, and how we are going to spend the money, and also the general economic policy. This has been left to the hands of the member states. As I told you, the monetary policy is made since by the European Central Banks in coordination with national central banks. What is very important is that the European Central Bank is a supranational and independent body, and it's a supranational and independent institution of the European Union. That means that no government can control it or can tell to the European Central Bank how to deal with the crisis. The European Central Bank makes its own decision. A big problem has been posed ever since the creation of the economic and monetary union. Okay, if we put our money together, so our currency together, how are we going to be sure that it's going to work and that our economies will be able to sustain it? In order to sustain a currency, you need to have a convergence, a real convergence between the member states. Because if not, differences between the member states will create disequilibrium, like the one that happened to Greece. And this question has been asked ever since the beginning of the economic and monetary union. Two answers have been brought to them. First of all, it was believed that it will come by the power of market. So because we have a market and we exchange the products between the countries, well, that means that up to a certain point, we will finish by having the same fiscal policies or the same way of taxing the TVA and so on and so forth. So they believe that the market will, in time, solve part of the problem. Of course, that can be the case, but the problem is that we didn't have the time of really doing it. Second of all, it was the idea of coordinating all the other elements and all the other aspects, that is the budget or the economic policy. And how was that to be done? Well, first of all, inside the Council of Ministers, one of the institutions of the European Union, which brought together ministers from different areas. So the financial ministers were meeting at a certain moment and discussing what do they do in their national country, in their country, in terms of their budget. They were informing their partners, and they were trying to coordinate their policies. But this, of course, was not compulsory. The coordination was not compulsory. So it was expected that it will happen with the time, that bigger convergence is going to happen. One of the only elements that tried to oblige states to have more convergence is the stability and the growth pact, which existed since 97, but which I reinforce actually once the euro currency did also. And this actually implied a certain number of rules, in which the most important, which you of course all heard about in the context of the crisis, is the fact that the deficit of a country should not pass the 3% of the GDP per year. And this was the rule which was allowing to have more or less the same kind of view on how the economy should be dealt with. Where it wasn't enough, because already we had the Stability and Growth Pact, which was functioning since the beginning of the year 2000. But if we look at the way it has actually worked, we see that since the beginning, since the middle of the year 2000, actually a lot of countries didn't respect it, starting with France and Germany. That means that even the rules, even on the rules that we agreed upon to respect, we didn't respect it. And that, of course, caused a lot of problems, because neither the coordination, neither the convergence were there. And that was very visible since the beginning of the crisis. Even more important, and this is something that also caused a lot of problems since the beginning of the crisis, is the fact that there were no clauses, clauses for no bailout. What that means? That means that there was a clear interdiction for a state of the European Union, for a member state of the European Union, in case it has a financial problem or a debt, there was a clear interdiction for any other state to finance directly its debt. And that's part of the explanation of what happened since 2010, because it was very difficult to finance directly Greece debt, because you had a legal problem with that. It was written in the Lisbon Treaty, in the Article 125, that you cannot do that. So when you need to rescue Greece in a few days, then you need to think about how to do it in another legal way, and not to expect a new treaty and so on and so forth, which again takes us to the political process of the European Union, which is very long. Second problem comes from the fact that the crisis that hit the European Union since 2010, because it started that way, it's a true European crisis, it's not just a global one, it's not just one. There are many, and they have different shapes, so they require different kind of answers. First of all, you have a crisis of sovereign debt, which, of course, has been felt in countries like Greece, which had simply too many debts from their GDP. Second of all, you had a crisis of the household debt. That means the individual, the population that had too many debts, generally towards the banking system. And this is the case of countries like Spain. You had then a crisis of competitiveness. That means that the economy were not acting in the right way, were not creating growth anymore. And that was the case in Portugal. Afterwards, you also have an economic governance crisis, which was felt at the level of the European Union, which didn't have the instances, the institutions that could deal with the economic crisis. Because in order to deal with the crisis, you again need the mechanism to do it, and you didn't have it. Fifth point, you also had a crisis of political cooperation, because it was a long process. Germany didn't agree with Greece. France didn't always agree with Germany on what should be done. Denmark didn't agree. Luxembourg didn't agree. So there was a political coordination problem, and on which you had different signals from different European capitals. And of course, one signal from Brussels from time to time after the European Council. And of course, there was bigger crisis than all of this, or that management is all of this, that is a crisis of European solidarity. What do we want to put together? Do we want to put together our money? Because that's an important question. We put together our currency. If we need to sustain it, we need to do more than that. And of course, this requires different solutions. At a time, two different opposing solutions has been identified. First of all, the one of creating a super state. That means creating a super European Union. And that makes me remind the compromise that I told you about a few weeks ago, the one between the federalist vision and the one between the confederalist vision. The one between creating a super state that will control economy, budget, fiscal policy, and so on and so forth at the European level and will impose its decision, and the breaking up solution on which we do nothing together anymore. And these two scenarios have been, in a realistic way, looked upon in the context of the crisis. What has been chosen between these two? It's of course a third one. And it has been, I just sum up it in three different kind of areas in which decisions have been made, but of course there are more complex decisions that we can put in different kind of categories, and we can also add to the three ones. First of all, what has been done is that we decided to help countries, European countries that have a debt problem, like the case of Greece. Because after Greece, you remember very well, that was also the case of Portugal or of Ireland. And what has been done is that a mechanism has been created that allowed it for money to be given to this kind of countries, something that was illegal, as you remember. So, in order to do it, actually, what has been fixed is a European Financial Stability Facility. This was made in 2010, and it has disappeared in 2013, in June. So it's disappearing even in this very month. And today, it has been replaced by the second term that you see there, which is the European Stabilization Mechanism. If we look at the legal form of this facility, actually, it's a very bizarre construction. It is registered under Luxembourgish law. It exists in offices in a building in Luxembourg, and it actually has like 20 employees. And it deals, individual member states give money to this enterprise that has been registered, which at its turn is financing debts of the countries, of the European countries which have problems. And this kind of construction is left out of the legal system of the European Union. So in itself, this construction is not part of the European Union, even if it has been used as a mechanism for the crisis to be dealt with. So again, the need to compromise. Why it hasn't been done in another way? Some say that it was because the Germans didn't want for the Commission to be empowered by giving her the responsibility of dealing with money. This is one of the theories, of course. Others say because it needed more time to be done in the proper way. So the decision has been made in 2010 to have this very mellow solution and very improvised solution in order to respond to the crisis. The question is, okay, if we done it in 2010, why then make it in a permanent system as it is the case today? So this is one of the things that has been done. We put money together under a bizarre construction in order to finance the debt of the countries that really need it. Second thing that has been done is that through different mechanisms, there was a strengthening of the framework of public finance. That means that you remember the Stability and the Growth Pact that I just mentioned. It required for different countries not to pass the 3% of the GDP deficit. Well, actually, this has been threatened in the way this it becomes even more compulsory because some sanctions were added to that. Some other decisions were added to that. Also what has been done is that more coordination and more compulsory coordination has been introduced. Maybe you all heard about the European semester. Actually, what it stipulates is that the European Commission can look before adoption into the member states at the budgets. So that means that any country, any member state of the European Union, of the Eurozone, is discussing its budget. Actually, it needs to discuss it also with the European Commission. And what the European Commission is trying to make is to put together these calendars in order to have a more coordinated calendar of budget in the European Union and to have a better view on the way the money is spent at the European level in different countries. So that is to improve the coordination. What has also been done is that the European Legislator General, the European Council in particular, tried to improve the financial regulation. They made more clear rules about supervising the bank system. You remember that it was in the press some time ago that some stress tests were introduced for the banks. Well, it was about that. It was about being able to control more and faster the European financial institution in order to know beforehand if a crisis will be coming and if we have structural problems. So there are three main areas in which things have been done. First of all, solve the crisis, the Greek one, and we're one of the countries that added afterwards. Find a mechanism to pay for the debt. Second of all, strengthening the coordination and the enforcement and enforcing actually the coordination and the sanctions related to the stabilization and the growth pacts. And third of all, better controlling the banking system and generally the financial regulation. So all the three things were done. Nevertheless, if you look at this, there were no big change. Actually, what we can see is that the way the crisis has been dealt from the policy point of view was more a way of increasing the mutual insurance of what we are doing together than really taking a step forward. We didn't took a step back either, because we didn't took back competences that were given to the European Union, but not greatly has been taken ahead, of course. So that was about the content of the economic and monetary union. What about the institutions? Well, if we look at the institutions, some changes has been happening since the beginning of the crisis. First of all, the European Council has become more and more visible. What is important to know is that the European Council is an institution that exists since the 70s and that reunites presidents and head of states or government, and that should meet a few times a year. Since the beginning of the crisis, the summits of the European Council has been growing in a significant way. That means that, I don't know, in the last 3-4 years, there were more than 30 meetings. Informal meetings, breakfast meetings, bilateral meetings, and so on and so forth. So they see each other more and more. And moreover, they are more and more visible to the press. That means that when the crisis was at its peak, what everybody looked at was the conclusions of the council. Everybody was expecting, the president was expecting midnight to see what decision has been made. Will we manage to save this? That was the place, the center of political gravity in the European Union, and it has become very obvious. Of course, the European Council has the role from a few years already of making important coordination decisions. But let's say that right now it really got involved in everyday politics in a more visible way. This has been also the case for its president, Herman Van Rompuy, which was elected in 2009 for the first time, which got the second mandate in 2012, and will be president until 2014. And he is more and more visible. He's all the time with Sarkozy or Hollande or Merkel, and he is more and more visible. For a new function that has been introduced by the Lisbon Treaty in 2009, this is quite a big step. Second institution that we are going to look upon is the European Commission. What we see is that during the crisis, if the influence of Van Rompuy, which is the president of the European Council, started to increase, well, the influence of the president of the Commission ceased to decrease. If we look again at the solutions that were taken, the biggest part of them were intergovernmental solutions. Of course, the European Commission prepared a large part of the texts that were decided upon by the European Council. Still, it hasn't played a visible major role in dealing with the crisis. The six-pack and the two-pack, which are two different measures, were written by the Commission, but important amendments have been made by the European Council. Yet, of course, the Commission remains central in the way the internal market is being taken. Another institution which has become very, very visible is the European Central Bank. And actually, it's a supranational institution, but this supranational institution has become at the center of the effort to deal with the crisis. Why? Because when everybody was in different rooms in Brussels trying to discuss what to do about the crisis and what kind of more permanent solutions to choose, actually the European Central Bank was trying to influence the value of the euro on the markets in a very day-to-day basis. And this has been key to the way the crisis has been felt in the pockets of the Europeans. Mario Draghi, which is the president of the European Central Bank, said, for instance, in July 2012, that the European Central Bank will do everything it takes to save the euro. So this independent supranational institution really showed itself as a true actor in the European crisis, even if at the very beginning its main mission is to ensure that there is a stability of prices into the European Union. So that's the only mission of the European Central Bank. And what it's trying to do is to really go beyond this mission. There is a problem right now with Mr. Draghi's statement, because when he said that the European Central Bank is going to do whatever it takes to solve the crisis, actually he was referring to a program which will allow the central bank to buy the debt of the countries in secondary markets. That is, if Greek government has a lot of debts, he can issue some state bonds, which he will sell on secondary markets. Like this, his debt can be bought. And the European Central Bank said in a very clear way that it wants to make a program in which this kind of debt can be bought by the European Central Bank. That means actually buying the debt of Greece without having the legal basis for it. This declaration has appealed to the German Constitutional Court, which will in September normally have to say if it's okay with it, this kind of measure to be taken by the European Central Bank. So what we see is that European Council becomes more visible, European Commission tries to be there but is not really controlling the political process, and the European Central Bank is trying to strengthen its role on the market. What about the relation between the European Union and its member states? Well, there are some developments that we managed to look at that has been noticed in the last year. First of all, it has been clear that developments at the European level have a significant effect on the national level of government. And this is particularly the case if we look, for instance, at the elections in Greece, at the political debate in Greece, if we look at the technocrat government that Italy had for 2 years, headed by Mario Monti. So we notice that in the context of the crisis, there is a bigger impact of economic measures and of the economic problems of the European Union that can be felt on the national politics. That means that there were parties which gained support because of the economic crisis felt at the European level. There were governments which were formed in reaction to that. And this was the case in Spain, this was the case in Italy, this was the case in Greece, and if you remember well, also on Cyprus. Second of all, and talking about the member states, what the current crisis has made is that it has underlined more and more differences between its member states. The differences become clearer and clearer. There is, for instance, a proposition which says we should create a euro currency for the northern countries, which do very well, and we should create another euro currency for the southern countries, which do not together, which don't manage to handle their economy very well, but have a lot of things in common with this way of not really dealing with the economy. So there should be 2 euro. And this image of north versus south has been very present into the press. Also, there has been more and more differentiation between the countries which are part of the Eurozone and the countries which are not. For instance, Rompuy was from time to time obliged at the European Council, which normally reunites the 27 or from 1st July 28 member states, he was obliged to tell 10 of them to get out of the room. Because even if the 28 are discussing about foreign policy and some general economic coordination policy, when it comes to discussing real euro-related issues, not all of them have to sit at the same table. So it becomes, the differentiation between the member states are getting more and more. There has also been underlined that Franco-German supremacy, which has been there since the beginning of the European integration, is being more and more felt. And you all remember the couple Mercosi, with Merkel and Sarkozy sitting together, meeting, and so on and so forth, showing that there is a united Europe. And also there are fears of German hegemony. And of course, the picture makes a reference to this north and south division, because countries, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, and Spain, have been called the pigs, which of course makes reference to the English terms of pigs, and which come exactly from the first letter of their name. So this is what has happened in terms of relation between the European Union and its members. We see more and more differences, and we see, of course, development in the national capitals, which have to do with the European crisis. What has happened at the national level is that diverging views between countries have been felt. I was talking a second ago about North and South, about small and big countries, about France and Germany and other countries. Well, they all have used the European Union in the national elections, as I just said, but they all have different views on what European integration should be. And the current crisis made that these differences in national preferences have been more and more visible. Ever since the European construction has begun, there is a constant complaint from European politicians that the European Union is not enough in the press, that people do not know what it is, what it's doing, and so on and so forth. Well, the good news is that if we look at the last years, actually the European Union has really been in the press and very much on the front page. Well, the bad news is that it was presented mainly in a negative way. The picture that I'm showing here, it's one that was taken from the front page of The Economist. So, yes, the European Union is more presented in the newspapers in the last years, but in a negative way. And of course, if we put that in relation to the fact that generally it was absent from the press, well then we have a problem with the legitimacy of the European Union and generally with the support of the European Union. And indeed, if we look at the public opinion in the European Union, actually it has never been so negative about the European constructions. In 2007, 1 out of 2 Europeans had a positive image about the EU, 52%. If we look in 2012, actually less than 1/3 have a positive image about the EU, that is 30%. At the same time, the negative image, the person that have a negative image of the EU have increased, because if in 2007, 15% of the Europeans had a negative image of the European Union, now the number is at 30. At the same time, the confidence has strongly diminished into the European Union, and this is particularly the case in countries like Greece, Spain, or Portugal. So crisis where, again, the European Union has been presented in a very negative way during the last years. This change, if we look at these numbers, we can see that they go in the same direction as the perception of the economic situation. That means that if the population has the impression that the economic situation is getting worse, well, they will tend to to have a more negative image of the European Union, which makes perfect sense, and it's also a relation which can be validated in terms of image of countries' government. Have a good impression on the economy, we have more chances to have a better view on our government. What is more worrying at the level of the European Union is the fact that if we look at those who changed their minds in the last 5 years over the image of the European Union, well, they were exactly those that were traditionally considered as the more European persons. That means the young, active, middle-class Europeans. They are the ones that change their mind. And very often their change of attitude is related to a larger tendency toward closer. That means that they fear more and more globalization, and they tend to have to show less support for enlargement. That means that they have a tendency towards conservatism, which was not there a few years ago. The last question that this raises is, of course, a question of the democracy. If we have people that are less and less involved into the European Union, and we have a growing negative image of the European Union, how can the EU democracy work? And actually, the question of the EU democracy, it's a long debated one. As I told you, the Danish referendum, actually that referendum was the beginning of bigger concerns related to the democratic deficit of the European Union. Because it has been said that if we look at the European Union, there is no enough connection between the people, the individuals, the citizens, and the very far European institutions. Decisions are taken in a too technocratic way, too far away from the citizens, behind closed door, with or rather international power logic between member states, then inequality and participation. And actually these tendencies and this criticism has been more and more visible since the beginning of the crisis, because more and more observers look at the way the crisis has been dealt with and say, look, it has been dealt in a democratic way by heads of states, by technocratic governments. If you take again the case of Italy, how have they been elected? Why do they have the legitimacy to invest our money to finance some other country? So this has raised a lot of problems related to the participation and the legitimation of the European Union itself. Of course, there is another vision which says the European Union is not a state, that it should not be judged in the same way that we judge a member state, and that we judge democracy of the state. It doesn't have the same aim, it doesn't. It's not dealing with the same amount of money, not at all. I told you even about the way the crisis, the debt, the Greek debt, not only have been financed, it hasn't been incorporated into the European law. So it's not the European Union who is dealing that money. So why it should be democratic? In the end, democracy is something that exists only at the national level, and knowing that the member states manage very well to control the development of the European Union, well, then it becomes more than obvious that what's necessary is already there. So it depends depends on the vision that we have. What is very important is that the European leaders, more generally, and European institutions, they try to react to the criticism related to the European lack of democracy. This is why the Lisbon Treaty, among other things, has introduced the right for citizens to propose legislative initiative if they gather 1 million signatures from different kind of countries. They have also underlined the fact that national parliaments should be more involved into the European debate and have a bigger role into the way the crisis is being dealt with and on the different legislation that is being decided. And this is because, of course, like this European Union could have even more indirect legitimacy. Is that enough? It is very difficult to see. And again, it depends on the view that we have on one of the compromises that I was mentioning at the beginning. That is the one on how do you see the European Union? What do you want it to be? You want it to be a federal state that maybe having federal state that resembles more national state and maybe discussing its democracy, it's a more legitimate way of doing. But if we don't want it to be that, and if we consider that states should control the integration process, then the question of democracy is not raised in the same way. And in order to sum up all that I have been saying, if we look at this crisis, we can see that on the one hand, at the level of the policy, there has been no new beginning. So actually, the old dynamics have been reinforced. There hasn't been a great leap, no great step forward, but there wasn't either a big renationalization of competences that were already given to the European Union. We need to see if there will be more institutional changes or more policy changes in order to see if this will be the case until the end of this crisis. Second of all, from institutional point of view, we notice that the European Council, which is the place where the states are represented, are more and more strong. And we have in the institutional logic a strong affirmation or reaffirmation of the place of the member states and of their heads of their government or heads of states. And this is quite important. At the same time, we have also the growing importance of an institution like the European Central Bank, which is a more supranational institution, but yet, with the German example of the Constitutional Court, which tried to limit the European Central Bank, we can ask ourselves in which way it really manages to do it. But all this raises, of course, a bigger question, which comes from the public opinion and from the way the national leaders have behaved during the crisis and the way they talked about the European Union during elections, national elections, raises the question of the democratic deficit and, of course, of the legitimacy of the European Union in itself. Because in itself, the debate about the democratic deficit, even if we consider it the right one or not, it shows that the EU lacks legitimacy. It is seen by different actors at different levels, population, national leaders, local leaders, even European leaders, as lacking legitimacy. This was what I wanted to tell you, and that's how I finish on the tone of the EU democracy. I don't know if you have questions. After all,
thank you.
I was trying to control it better. Yeah.
Do you have maybe any data which countries are now more skeptical about European Union? Those who got this help from European Union, or for example Germans, French, and others?
Actually, I just looked for today. I just looked at data of where the biggest changes have been noticed, and this is particularly the case. I think Spain is the country where the biggest changes in public opinion has been noticed. Greece is also the case. I mean, I think in Spain there was a difference of 20 point percentages of difference between the positive and the negative in the last year. So the biggest differences were in these countries. the countries that were hit by the crisis had to face austerity measures which were seen as coming from the European level. This is clearly the case. So that was an erosion, if you want, of the enthusiasm related to the European Union, because at the origin, Spain is one of the countries which was traditionally quite enthusiastic about the European Union. In countries like Germany or France, this has been felt in the same way. Even there, there is an erosion of the confidence in the European Union generally.
Thank you.
Thank you for that thorough lecture. In the beginning of the slide, you mentioned Jean Monnet and how Europe will be forged in crises. And then you talked about the four crises that allowed for further integration. Do you think that Europe needs a bigger crisis, or this crisis needs to escalate in order for further integration, or for Europe to move forward?
I think crises have been the past in the European Union. This is what I was trying to say, and that they have an impact on the way the European construction and the European integration process is happening. I am not sure that necessarily crises have a big effect. For instance, we would like more European integration, because this is what your question is about, I have the impression. Then I'm not sure that it's by the crisis that we are going to do it. Yes, the crisis put European leaders in front of a necessity. We need to solve this. And in order to solve this, one of the scenarios is to integrate furthermore. Of course, this obligation is a very important thing. But the problem is that it cannot be the only way to do it, because in times of crisis, and if we look at the last years, especially an economic crisis, because the crisis that we talked about at the beginning are also more political crises. This is an economic crisis which is double what the political one. And when economics are involved, people don't want to pay for it. And this is a very realistic term. So maybe, yes, in itself, it's better to have a bigger crisis to be obliged to do even more. But the result is, maybe it won't be this one. As I said, all these crises oblige also to a certain kind of compromise. And the compromise is, okay, we do something, but we do not wait until the end. We decided to finance Greek debt, but actually we didn't integrate this into the European law, which is a very strong limitation to the idea of integration, and which maybe means that the states are more and more important into the European integration process, and that actually we are not making a step forward. And this is important. So it depends on the kind of crisis, and it depends on the political context, which outcomes are going to come. It is not clear that the crisis will bring more opportunity. And very often, a problem was solved years afterwards, or in another way, not on the moment, because it's very complicated to deal with the national interest, with national election calendar, which, for instance, for Germany is coming in September, and this is need to make at a certain moment. And of course, the fact that we make certain decisions in time of crisis is limiting also the decision that we can make afterwards. The fact that we decided to finance and to of other countries in the way that we did means that we will not feel obliged in the future to change the system, because we already started doing it. So this also is something that comes into play. I think what it means, it's a better political context maybe, and more political leaders which are strongly in favor of Europe. I think this is one of the things that is really missing from the European landscape right now, that would push for more European integration. Yes.
You were talking about Euro enthusiasts like in Spain or European Union in the 90s. But I mean, even Eastern Europe used to be quite enthusiastic about the process of European integration. So you think that this, let's say, the last year of crisis might have affected the further process of European integration, especially in schools, and what you think would be the results of this project? You know that the European enlargement process has involved a great, let's say, argument.
Yes, I think it's a problem. I think In political science and system, there is a term that maybe you already heard about, the term of permissive consensus. It was considered that for a very long time, there was this consensus, permissive consensus, which allowed the European leaders to further integrate without necessarily the population being against. Or this has started to disappear with the beginning of the 90s, with the different no's to the referendums that have happened since. The Danish one, the French one, the Irish one, and so on and so forth. So there were a lot of signs from the European population saying this is not the kind of Europe we would like to. In a lot of cases, it wasn't about the treaty in itself that the European population was pronouncing. It wasn't about the Maastricht Treaty, it wasn't about the Constitution, as it wasn't about the Lisbon Treaty in the case of Ireland. It was more about the fact that they considered Europe to be too far, to be kind of useful, to not be too useful, and a little bit too technocratic, why bigger states should decide more, and so on and so forth. So there are some true critics there. And I think that the main disadvantage of this crisis, beyond the problems with the Eurozone, which are very important, of course, is the fact that the negative image of the European Union has clearly been reinforced. And I'm not talking just about public opinion figures or the Eurobarometer, which of course we can criticize about the way it's done and so on and so forth. But it's the idea that for long ago, and this is something that I mentioned in my presentation, for long ago you didn't have Europe in the press, and now you have it, but it's negative. I mean, I think these are things that are going to be felt in the future. As to the countries that are coming from Central and Eastern Europe, their enthusiasm are very much related to the end of the communist period, to the beginning, to the democratic transition, for which there was also some enthusiasm in the 90s, and afterwards the European integration, which seemed a logical step, and was also very much for a large part of countries the promise of a better economic future. Or what we see now is that this good European future cannot be guaranteed anymore, or at least not in the form that it was. It's also maybe an opportunity for Eastern countries to realize that they can sit at the table of discussion and they can shape the European future, and this will be maybe a possibility for them to become more mature in the European decision-making process. And there are countries which are getting more and more interested. For instance, one example, Romania and Serbia, because they want to be part of the decision-making related to the reforms of the Eurozone, even if they are not part of this area. So I think that it can be seen as an opportunity for the leaders, but I think that during this crisis, something is starting to be lost, and that is the confidence of the people, and I think it will be very, very difficult to build it afterwards, especially because the European process is not an easy one, it's a very far one, and it's a complex one. It's happening partially behind closed doors, and because national leaders don't have any kind of interest in presenting necessarily the European Union in the image they presented, it's easier to say we are taking these austerity measures because the European context demands it than to say we're taking it because anyway we have to do it. It's clearly more easy. So I think that what has been lost during this crisis, we do not have, at least for the moment, the necessary instruments to solve it and to reverse the tendency.
Thank you for your presentation. I would have a question regarding the interplay between the EU institutions during the crisis. You mentioned the increasing political role of the Council versus the decreasing role of the Commission. Taking into account that the decisions of the Council are based at this moment on many of the Commission's recommendations and communications, would you see the Commission taking in the future a rather more technical role?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think that, yes, the Council has risen, especially in visibility, and for an institution that wasn't existing until the 70s, this is a big step. Yet, it's true that the Commission has also played a role. I mean, a part of the things that were decided upon came on populism from the Commission. And even at a certain, I was reading a paper which was explaining that actually the Commissioner for Competition, Mr. Almunia, was very much involved in drafting different papers of the European Council. Yet, the political visibility is not coming in this direction. So the nation states want to keep the quality of the decision that we are making on the European level, and it's an easy way also of saying that it's not being done is because the Commission is not doing what we are doing, is because we are sitting at the same table. So it's also a play between two institutions, but it's clear that they need to work together, and that the Commission is already a rather technocrat institution. It will maybe reinforce this role, and it will decrease the political visibility. It's also very much dependent on the personality of the president of the Commission, because if you think about, I would take the classical example of the lower president of Stanculescu, president of the Commission. He played an important role because of his personality. He was coming from the socialist, and it was easy at the time to build that. And on the world, he was coming from a big state. He had French support, which wasn't nothing. But also it's already there for some time. He's not seen as the most proactive president of the Commission. He's coming from not such a big state, and plus with problems in the economic crisis. So this can, of course, jeopardize the visibility of the Commission. So it would be better if some other president with more with a strong personality and would make maybe a difference in the way the Commission plays its role. And the things are not decided. I was just showing tendencies that can be noticed in the last few years.
Like Donald Tusk?
This is a question that needs to be seen. There are discussions about it. Even Barroso would like to present himself for the third term, to be seen. Other questions if you have. Then we can finish. It's okay.
Yeah, then we can. Thank you very much. Thank you for all the participants of today's discussions, and we will meet again tomorrow at 9. Thank you very much.